That's a great prayer to begin a class on the Psalms, because the Psalms are prayers of folks who are sad and anxious and angry and joyful. Put that in there too. So that's a great beginning. Well, good morning. If the sound fluctuates, you can blame it on my voice, which is always a possibility. Also, Lance is in the back trying to get things figured out. As I understand it, there's all persistent challenges with an older building and a sound system that was not built in 1952, keyed to a building that was built in 1952. And so they're trying to improve. I hope if it fluctuates and he's twiddling and turning knobs and getting everything, we're the guinea pigs so that it works well for worship when everyone's in here. So I beg your patience and indulgence as we try to figure it out. Also tell Lance thank you. 70 tests yesterday, I think he said they ran at different points, doing who knows what, with what kind of equipment I don't understand, all over the place, trying to get things figured out. Okay. I want to, yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Let's say, I don't, all I know is how to turn it on, and I don't often get that right. Okay, well, I've got my clock here, and we aim to keep introducing the book of Psalms. Also, I got my key. I don't know how I got that. The introduction, and I think I have enough cards for everyone, but here's some for y'all. And some for y'all. And I think we've got enough for everyone to have one. But if you live together and you want to share one, that'd be fine. We got enough. Let me give you these cards. And I forgot to do it last week. Hi, good morning. Hi, sweetie. Don't look at me, that's okay. I know I'm scary looking. I forgot to do this last week, but they're blank cards. So, if you have a favorite psalm that you want us to study, or a question, or a psalm that it may not be your favorite, you're like, you need to do this one, okay? Put it on the card, and then I'll take them up when we're done, and I'll be happy to take that into consideration as we plan out. Of course, the teaching committee, education committee, has prepared curriculum guides for the teachers. And I'm taking that into consideration too, but I always do my own prep anyway. The guides are helpful, but I never just use someone else's material. I always kind of chew on it again. Well, as I'm chewing, I thought, you let me know what I ought to be thinking about. As I started, I said, do not forget Jana, and then I came around and almost forgot, so. Okay. This introduction probably will continue until next week. There's more introduction to do, and as I said last time, we can't go through all 150 Psalms. There's just too many. We can't even survey that many and really do justice. It would be so superficial as to almost be useless. Wouldn't be useless, but it would be too thin. Okay, so we've got to be selective. Thus the cards. And so I also think if I do an extra 2 or 3 weeks of introduction of some ideas or some information that will be transferable across the book of Psalms, then hopefully I've equipped you to read across the book of Psalms and it be a fruitful, enjoyable, helpful experience, even though we can't study each particular psalm. Okay? So that's part of my rationale. Well, in Romans, Paul wants the church in Rome to understand that their harmony is critical for his getting to Spain, and it's not just geography that's important. There is a doctrinal, theological imperative that's critical for Paul to get to Spain. The doctrinal imperative is that he declare the gospel to all creatures, to the whole world. So he's going to go from one end of the Mediterranean to the other. That the gospel fill the earth. And Spain is way out there on the end. Well, I guess theoretically the end would be up in England. They were going pretty far out, the Romans were by the first century. But the point is to get it out. And the point is to get it out to cross cultural and socio-ethnic boundaries between and among groups. The gospel is for all. And that starts at home in Rome with a church that is multi-ethnic and seems to be at crossways with each other. A predominantly Jewish church becomes Gentile in the 50s, and as a result of the emperor kicking all the Jews out of Rome because they were fighting over some guy named Chrestus, and probably a Latin form of the name Christ. All you Jews out. So he kicks all the Jews out. Christian Jews, non-Christian Jews, seems like it doesn't matter. Which then renders the church in Rome mostly Gentile. And that ban on the Jews is lifted, and they come back. You come back to church, and it's not the same as it was when you left. There's friction, seems to be. And Paul needs to get to Spain because the gospel is for all, and that starts at home with a church that is at odds with each other. It's critically important that the church in Rome understand what's at stake. What's at stake is the all-surpassing glory of God for the sake of all of his people, his beloved creation. We've got to get it out. What's going to help us, for the sake of the glory of God, come into harmony with one another is when we read the scriptures and we understand the encouragement and the endurance that we have through the scriptures, not to give up. Living in harmony in community in the church is not easy, and it's hard to get, and when you've got it, you've got to keep it, because if it fractures, boy, that's awful. Hard to get. In fact, we couldn't do that by ourselves. God gives us endurance, and he gives us encouragement as we read in the scriptures. So that was Romans 15. First part of Romans 15. We looked at that last week. For the sake of the glory of God, the church has got to be in harmony. For the sake of the outpouring of the gospel to all. And that means we've got to live in harmony. How could we expect anyone to find our message compelling if it does not first change and conform us to his image? We've got to go out. So Paul needs to get to Spain, and Rome is going to underwrite the trip, not just financially. Spiritually, they've got to underwrite it. They got to get together to get me out for the sake of the gospel to go out. Now, we have hope through the endurance and the encouragement from the scriptures. Scriptures. The law, the prophets, and the writings, or the law, the prophets, and the Psalms. So when we look at the Psalms, we're looking at one major chunk of the scriptures, the point of which, for Paul, as he writes in Rome, or in Romans, is to form the church into a harmonious community for the sake of God's work in the world. So I'm kind of getting around into a Christian way of reading the Psalms, which we'll talk more about next week and on occasionally. It's critically important that the church read the Psalms because the Scriptures give us encouragement and endurance. It's hard to maintain this harmony. It's easy to give up. What you need to know is don't give up. How can I not give up? How could I possibly be encouraged by the Scriptures? Well, the Scriptures talk about the great work of God and the good nature of God and the great purpose of God. That's encouraging. So the Scriptures will tell us and instruct us about who God is and what God has done in the world and who we are and what our place is in the world. So when I begin to wonder whether or not I matter, the Scriptures give me encouragement. If I wonder where my place is, the Scriptures will teach me. If I wonder who God is, the Scriptures will instruct me. If I falter, the Scriptures will give me endurance. And so this is not something you just kind of got to turn it up and, encourage yourself. May God, who gives endurance and encouragement, grant you to live in harmony with one another according to Christ Jesus, so that you may glorify the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. That's Romans 15, 5 and 6. God gives endurance. This is not up to you to just kind of churn it up and do better. God gives you endurance. He gives you encouragement. So when we come to the book of Psalms, let's see, what do we have here in this chief book of the third division of the Scriptures? The law, the prophets, and the writings, or the law, the prophets, and the Psalms. We looked at a passage in Luke which talks about mentions that threefold division. That seems to be how the Jews conceived of the Scriptures, what we would call the Old Testament. They would think of it in three major groupings: the law, the prophets, and the writings. Chief among the collection of the writings is the longest book in that third, or the longest collection, or the longest anthology in that third grouping, which is the poetry, the Psalms. Law, prophets, and Psalms. Law, prophets, and writings. Well, what do we have? Okay, so by the time Paul writes Romans, first century Palestine, first century Rome, first century Greece, Asia Minor, the Jews who are living down in Egypt and speaking Greek, the Jews who are living up in the hinterlands in Asia Minor speaking Greek, the Jews living in the homeland in Palestine speaking Hebrew or Aramaic or Greek or all the above. They were using the Psalms as a set, much like we have them as a set. Okay, which is what? A collection of about 150. Depends on how you number them. There's a couple of them that seem to have been counted as one. I think you remember that rabbinic tradition that talks about the washing of the vessel, and it was about the size of a cup, the size that could hold about an egg's worth of water. You remember that? Okay, that same set of tradition, oral in the time of Jesus, comes to be written down later. That tradition says 147 Psalms. 147, how do you get that? Well, it seems like they counted a couple together as one. Okay, got 150. It's not chapters, because this is not linear in the sequence of chapter 2 follows chapter 1 and then chapter 3. These are individual compositions. It's an anthology. It's a collection. 150 units. And as you look through your English Bible, for example, and I mentioned this last time, at Psalm 1, at the very beginning, at the heading, you will find a statement, Book 1. Our Pew Bible says Book 1, parenthesis, Psalms 1 to 41. Okay, I didn't know. Book 1, I didn't notice that before. Maybe you've noticed that before. Maybe you have a study Bible that gives you a footnote. Okay. If you go to Psalm 41, or 42, you'll see Book 2, little subheading. Okay? And on we go. I have a handout in a minute that will give you more information. It looks like we've got 5 subsets within the 150 Psalm anthology. Okay? And it may well be that the sets grouped the Psalms together roughly by theme or content. You're going to get a little cluster of Davidic Psalms, not all of David's Psalms. Then you're going to get a cluster of Psalms by other people, kind of clustered together, okay, as a set or an anthology. And it seems like, for lack of a better term, kind of the traditional view is this is the hymn book or the song book of the Second Temple. That this set grows out of usage in the Second Temple. Like, okay, Second Temple, what do I mean by that? Well, you know the First Temple, Solomon, okay? That was destroyed by the Babylonians in the 500s BC. You know, the Babylonians come in about 586, carry Judah off to captivity. Now, mind you, that's 120, 140 years after the Assyrians carried the northern kingdom of Israel off into captivity. Okay, so the kingdom of Israel divides, and in time, its neighbors to the northeast come in and overtake them. Okay, we talked a lot about that when we looked at Micah. Okay, the temple is destroyed. They're in Babylonian captivity for 70, 80 years-ish. They're coming back in waves, and they come back to rebuild. They rebuild the temple. They rebuild the city of Jerusalem. It's not near what it was. In fact, the old-timers, when they see what it was, and they say, that's not what I remember. That's not what we remember. It's not like it was. And they cry and they weep. I remember what it was. Well, they weren't alive, but they're like, I know this is not as grand as it was. Okay? They rebuild it. And it stands with modifications and additions, developments, until about AD 70, when the Romans do the same thing the Babylonians did, just put their thumb right down on top of Jerusalem, okay, and destroy it again. It hasn't been rebuilt. Okay? So when I say Second Temple, it's that temple built after the exile. Okay? It's the temple that Jesus would have seen, Jerusalem. Okay? So this period, let's say the 500 years between the rebuilding of the temple and Paul in Romans, the book of Psalms as a set, more or less the set we know, comes into setness. Okay. Well, look at Amos 8. In your Pew Bible, it's page 817. Let's look at about 3 verses and see this. So folks have started to look, well, let's look at the prophets. Let's look at the Psalms. Let's see, what do we have here? Couple passages, only 3 for now. Amos 8:3. Now, this is a woe. This is a prophecy of doom. This is not good news. It's not an oracle of hope. This is an oracle of doom. Okay? An oracle of judgment. Okay? How about 8 verse 1? In our Pew Bible, it's page 816, 817. The Lord showed me this, a basket of summer fruit. Okay? Without getting into all of how the inner workings of inner logic of prophecy works, He sees a basket of summer fruit. He says, what do you see? A basket of summer fruit. Okay. What does that mean? A basket of summer fruit has to do with the harvest. Okay. Gathering in the harvest. Okay. If this were in film, there would be a dramatic pause and some ominous music. So the Lord, if you imagine two people having a conversation and someone takes off their glasses and looks right at you and you're like, okay, this is serious. What does this mean? What do you see? I see summer fruit. You're right. What's that mean? The end has come. I will no longer spare them. In that day, the temple songs will become wailing. It chills up your spine. The temple songs will be turned into mourning. I'm going to flip everything up. Okay. On we go. Okay, without getting into the prophetic inner workings, just notice we're going to take the temple songs and we're going to turn them into wailing. The day's coming. Okay? Which means what? There were temple songs. That's the only point there to get, is there were temple songs, singing at the temple. Okay? That's Amos. That's a prophecy in advance of the destruction of the temple. Okay? Let's look at Ezra 3. In our Pew Bible, that's page 409. The long tradition is that Ezra compiles the book of Psalms. So the work of compilation traditionally ascribed to Ezra, the scribe. Okay. Ezra 3:10. So this narrative of rebuilding the temple. Okay. When the builders had laid the foundation of the Lord's temple, the priests dressed in their robes, holding trumpets, and the Levites descended from Asaph, holding cymbals, took their position to praise the Lord as King David of Israel had instructed. They sang with praise and thanksgiving. For he is good, his faithful love to Israel endures forever. Okay, you remember our word study. Okay? Remember the term often used for faithful love or steadfast love. We looked at several places of that word showing up in the Psalms. Chesed. Okay? If you look at Ezra 3:11, without looking at it in context, you'd say, that sounds like he's quoting the Psalms. Which one? I don't know, because that refrain shows up all the time in the Psalms. Okay? He is good, his faithful love endures forever. Very common phrase from the Psalms. So as they rebuild the temple, they're singing. Okay? That's the major takeaway. This is a great thing. This is a great thing. Because, let's look at another one, Jeremiah 33. I wanted to bookend Ezra, getting the dedication, I guess it'd be kind of like laying the cornerstone and all of kind of pomp and circumstance of the dedication and building and rebuilding, and we're back. It's not like it was, I know, but we're back. Okay? We're back home. That's an important moment. I wanted to bookend that with Amos on the front end to say, you realize why we're going to destroy it. Okay? Now, I also wanted to bookend that with another prophecy. Let's look at Jeremiah 33, which is page 702, where Jeremiah, the prophet, can look down the road and he can say, I see a day, it's weeping today, but we'll rejoice later. Okay. 33:10. This is what the Lord says. in this place, which you say is a ruin, without people or animals, that is, Judah's cities, Jerusalem's streets, they're a desolation without people, without inhabitants, without animals. There'll be heard again a sound of joy and gladness, the voice of the groom and the bride, the voice of those saying, give thanks to the Lord of armies. The Lord is good, his faithful love endures forever. You're like, that sounds like the Psalms. Like, yeah, exactly. Yes, that is right. That sounds like the Psalms. They bring thank offerings to the temple of the Lord. I will restore the fortunes of the land as in former times. You look around and you see it as a wasteland now, but I tell you, the day is coming. We'll come back and we'll sing. That's a great oracle of hope. Okay? What's the point? Singing in the temple. Okay. Well, let's look at a couple more examples. Let's go to Numbers 15. Now that tells us they're singing at the temple. It doesn't tell us what they're singing. It doesn't always really even tell us who's singing. Okay? It may well be there's a chorus. It may be there's a choir master leading the choir. It seems obvious. They may sing along with the people. They may sing to the people. They may sing and the people listen. They may sing and the people respond. Kind of like we do with our readings as we open worship. The leader will say something and the congregation will respond. A responsive singing or a responsive song. Or back and forth. With, we kind of do that when we sing in parts. You have the altos and sopranos sing a part, and then the bass line comes in and says something else. So you're speaking to each other with the psalm. Is that how the Psalms would have been heard? Very possible. Okay. Well, let's look at Numbers 15. There may be an interesting connection here. Okay, this is page 129, Numbers 15, 3 through 8. I don't necessarily need to read all of this. I just want you to glance and see what's happening. Okay? Look at Numbers 15:1. Speak to the Israelites, this is the Lord to Moses, speak to the Israelites, tell them, when you enter the land and you make a fire offering to the Lord from the herd or the flock, whether that's a burnt offering or a sacrifice. Burnt offering would mean the whole thing was burned up, okay? Or a sacrifice, which means it's not a barbecue, but you would cook some of it and then the priest would eat of it and you would eat of it. Kind of like a barbecue in a sense. In other words, it's not consumed by the fire, it'd be consumed by the people. Okay? Either a burnt offering or a sacrifice to fulfill a vow, or a freewill offering, or at your appointed festivals. In other words, pretty much any time. Okay? Many use cases of when you're offering sacrifices at the altar and there's fire. Okay? To produce a pleasing aroma for the Lord. Now we know what a barbecue smells like. You're like, boy, that smells good. You're outside and you catch a whiff, someone's grilling out. Smells good, right? Pleasing aroma. Okay. The one presenting his offering is also to present a grain offering, and then you can go down and you can see all that. Do this, do this, do this. Okay. This is the same for you and the alien who resides with you. Bring them in to the community. They are to do the same thing you do. Bring them in, integrate them in. Okay? The assemblies have the same statute for you, the resident alien. Okay? Well, let's look at Psalm 66. And I I can give you page number, but it's between 65 and 67. All right, page 506. A little snarky there. So the law says, when you do this sacrifice, you are to do this. Okay. Here's a psalm that talks about the very thing legislated about or regulated in Numbers 15. Okay. So look at the reference of when the worshiper comes into the temple complex. Okay. If you look at Psalm 66 at the heading, this doesn't tell us who it's by or for. It just, it's for the choir director, whoever that is. Okay. It's a song. It's a psalm. So we know that much. Okay. So there's the heading. It seems like those headings may emerge out of that Second Temple period. Okay. So we've got a clue, perhaps, of how it was used. Okay, where it was used. Okay, 66:13. I will enter your house with burnt offerings. I will pay you my vows that my lips promised and my mouth spoke during my distress. I will offer you fattened sheep as burnt offerings with the fragrant smoke of rams. I will sacrifice bulls with goats. Okay. So here's a song that talks about doing the same thing legislated in Numbers 15. When you come into the land, you are to do this, and this, and this amount of grain, and this amount of flour, and this, that, and the other. Okay? Here in Psalms is, I come into your presence, and I offer you sacrifice. Okay? If we were to go back and look at all of Psalm 66, it's about God's great nature, His great work, who He is and what He's done for us. In fact, it goes back to creation. It goes back to the Exodus. Look at verse 6. Great character of God, celebrated. You come into His presence with sacrifice and you rejoice. Okay. Looks like an indication of the usage of the Psalms, or the usage, or what happens when they sing at the temple. Okay, I hope you had a finger in Numbers 15. Sorry, I didn't tell you that. Keep a finger in Numbers 15, or go back to Numbers 19, and let's see another one. And keep a hand in Psalms, because we're going to go back there. We're going to do the same thing. Numbers 19, which is page 133. It's another regulation about sacrifice. The whole point of Numbers 19 is purification, but not in a hygienic sense, not in a sense of germ theory, but a sense of purification because God is holy and separate, and we're not. And when we come into His presence, we do so carefully. The most basic approach is we're not flippant or careless. And even when various things have happened, here are procedures we go through, because these are deviations from the norm. Something has happened, and we account for that thing that has happened so that we come into the presence of God, or so that we can return to the presence. There's been some disruption, and we come back into the presence, back into the ritual presence when we offer sacrifices or perform rituals. We do so with an awareness of who we are compared to the holiness of who God is. Okay? So that's why you bring in unblemished, 'animals. Numbers 19:1. Okay? You don't bring in the second-rate ones. You bring the good ones. Okay? You go down through the verse 4. The priest takes some blood and you sprinkle it. Okay? You burn this sacrifice, hide, flesh, and blood, everything. Nothing goes to waste. Everything. Okay? The priest takes cedar wood, hyssop, crimson yarn, put them into the fire. And then the priest washes his clothes and bathes his body so that he may enter the camp. Okay. In other words, there's some procedures that mark this off as very special and unique. The basic upshot. It's not a flippant afterthought. Okay? Even the one who burned the cow, verse 8, wash his clothes, bathe his body. Man who's clean, gather up the cow's ashes, deposit them outside the camp in a clean, ceremonially clean place. The ashes are kept for preparing the water to remove impurity. It's a sin offering. Why is this special? Because sin is serious. We're going to get to the most essential point. This is a special event with procedures and ceremonies. We do special things because we take it seriously, because sin is serious. I don't want to be trivial, but the most basic explanation that I think is at stake here is this is serious business. Okay? Verse 11, the person who touches a human corpse, that's an exceptional circumstance. That doesn't happen every day. When that happens, something disrupts kind of the ordinary kind of flow of life. You're unclean for 7 days. The point is to get you back into ceremonial cleanliness. The point is not to push you away. The point is something awful has happened and we need to note and account for that. Purify himself with the water on the 3rd day, and the 7th day, then he'll be clean. If he doesn't purify himself on the 3rd and 7th, he will not be clean. This is not something you trifle with. Okay? Touches the body of a person who's died, doesn't purify himself. He defiles the tabernacle of the Lord. Cut that person off. Okay? Now when a person dies in a tent, you do it this way. Okay? Notice verse 18. There's this plant, hyssop. You take the hyssop, you dip it in the water, you sprinkle the tent. Okay? The idea is we go through a procedure because the presence of God is special, and to come into the presence of God means something, and when something disrupts normal life, you account for that. Okay? Well, look at Psalm 51. Without getting all the way into the weeds of that sacrifice. Psalm 51. You may recognize that from the number. Okay? Our Bibles will give us a notation at the top, a Psalm of David when the prophet Nathan came to him after he had gone to Bathsheba. So this superscription at the top of the psalm helps us understand the narrative surrounding the composition of the psalm, which is David's been caught. Okay. So this song comes out of that experience. Look at verse 7. Purify me with hyssop, and I will be clean. Something has disrupted David's relationship with Yahweh. So when David wants to come back, purify me with hyssop. So the seriousness of sin marks out the ceremonies that you go through as you do sacrifice. You see a similar emphasis here. David says, create in me a clean heart. I want to come back. Purify me with hyssop and I'll be clean. So it's a different, it's a poetic take on what legally was mentioned or described in Numbers 15. So we've got a law paragraph and a poem that kind of come together and tell us something. Okay. Since we're at Psalm 51, you see that superscription at the heading. Sometimes, since we're in the 50s, let's just notice, sometimes this will, this one is long. It's for the choir director, and we have a context of the composition of the thing. It's a Psalm of David when Nathan confronted him, okay? Look at Psalm 52, a maskil of David. Sometimes we will get a clue of what kind of psalm it is. Okay, now you say, it's great, but that doesn't help me. What does maskil mean? Okay, maybe teaching, a teaching psalm, a didactic song, a teaching psalm. Okay, turn the page. Right here in the 50s, we have a lot, and they are often connected with David. Mahalat in verse 53. Not quite sure what that means. Okay. Or you have an instruction about how it is to be performed or sung or accompanied with strings, like 54 and 55. Psalm 56, a miktam, M-I-K-T-A-M. What's that? Miktam. That may be a psalm that was inscribed somewhere, maybe publicly. Okay. I guess we'd say published. Okay. Maybe it's a tune. Look at Psalm 58. Do not destroy. Okay, well, and then there is the ever-present Selah, which I said last week. What does that mean? It means pause. That's what we're going to do right now. We'll pause. Okay? Hope this is helpful to help get us into the book. We'll do some more introduction next week. If you have your cards, you don't have to give them back to me now. You can give them back to me now, keep them. Think about the Psalms you want to look at, and we'll try to get those as we go through. And again, you can give them to me today, you can keep them, give them to me next week, but point is, file that away, and we'll pick